Ferreira da Silva views mathematical logic as a crucial initial stage in the deductive construction of mathematics. He considers it a fundamental discipline for understanding the logical truths underlying reality. For him, mathematical logic does not aim to establish quantitative or metric relationships, which are fundamental characteristics of mathematics. Instead, its purpose is to clarify and study the first mental instruments such as terms and propositions that are universally employed by the human mind. Ferreira da Silva emphasizes that this new logical science is not independent of the ancient Aristotelian logic, but rather a systematization and remodeling of it. He argues that all chapters traditionally dividing classical logic have undergone critical review, reformulation, and expansion. The term mathematical logic highlights the precision and clarity required in establishing truths rather than implying the introduction of mathematical methods into logic itself. Challenges to the traditional conception of logic. Ferreira da Silva directly challenges the traditional view of logic as an exclusively philosophical science by asserting its autonomy as an independent science. He argues that modern logic has its own distinct methods and objectives, thus liberating itself from philosophical opinions about the nature of the universe. For 2 millennia, traditional logic remained largely unchanged, maintaining its metaphysical substratum. However, Ferreira da Silva points out that in the last 60 years, a new atmosphere has surrounded logical research, proving more fruitful than the preceding 2,000 years combined. The distinguishing characteristic of this new phase of logic is precisely its independence from philosophy, allowing it to develop as a self-contained discipline. Impact of logic's independence on understanding logical truths and applications. Independence of logic from philosophy, as described by Ferreira da Silva, has led to the development of an autonomous science with its own methods. This autonomy has resulted in the systematization of logical truths that, once established, can be applied to clarify philosophical and scientific questions. This new logic serves as an art of thinking well, with a purpose distinct from the classical logic often taught in schools, which he suggests was more conducive to disputes than to clarifying truth. One key impact is the resolution of antinomy problems that arose in classical logic. Classical logic held that every proposition, even nonsensical ones, was necessarily true or false. The modern approach, through theory of types, resolves this by classifying propositions into meaningful, which can be true or false; nonsensical, which are neither true nor false. This allows for a more precise understanding of logical truths and their potential application in various fields. Methods for addressing philosophical problems through symbolic logic. Ferreira da Silva utilizes symbolic logic to demonstrate processes of indirect verification and the deduction of verifiable consequences about perceptible objects. He illustrates this with the example of asserting it rained overnight, explaining that verification can be indirect when there is no immediate perception, necessitating the verification of deduced propositions. This method involves analyzing concrete cases to determine the truth or falsity of a judgment based on indirectly verifiable propositions. He also identifies 2 processes for guiding the knowledge of reality: immediate verification for perceptible objects, deduction of verifiable consequences for perceptible objects. He notes that absolute certainty is not achieved in indirect verification. Rather, the more verified consequences accumulate, the more validity the hypothesis gains in the scientific field. Furthermore, Ferreira da Silva employs logical methods to address philosophical problems such as ethics. He argues that ethics, understood as the science of good and evil, cannot be an object of scientific research. He refutes the idea that ethical norms and value judgments can be verified as truths through patient study. Instead, he posits that ethics is a matter of taste and desire, not representative knowledge. He cites Wittgenstein to support the idea that all sentences have the same value and meaning lies beyond intrinsic value. Distinction between valid and invalid propositions in modern logic. Ferreira da Silva introduces the distinction between valid and invalid propositions in modern logic. He emphasizes that assignments of truth and falsity are applicable only to synthetic assertions, not to analytic propositions. Valid propositions are those deducible from postulates through the laws of logic. Invalid propositions do not meet this criterion. This distinction establishes more precise criteria for determining the validity of a proposition, thereby influencing the comprehension of logical truths by setting clearer boundaries for what can be considered true or false within a logical framework. Addressing the finality of the universe. Ferreira da Silva addresses the question of the universe's finality by questioning whether the universe follows a predefined plan or if it develops according to intrinsically projected directions. He contrasts finalist theories which seek to find a purpose in natural phenomena with logicist theories. Finalists argue that the ascending evolution from amoeba to human cannot be explained solely by physical processes, considering the possibility of reverse evolutionary steps to be distressing. Logicists, on the other hand, argue that such propositions lack defined meaning and are merely combinations of sounds or signs. They assert that if there were a teleological adaptation with an immanent design in events, it would require interpretation, as facts simply exist and do not reveal anything superior to themselves. Propositions from finalists are considered hypothetical, organizing a theory that involves natural forces and other agents. The central question for logicists is how to distinguish the presence or absence of a design in phenomena, formal logic. Vs. psychological approach to human reasoning and language. Ferreira da Silva emphasizes that formal logic, unlike psychology, is not concerned with conscious states. Instead, it focuses on the laws of coherence and compatibility of the modes of expression of reasoning. For logicians, a judgment is not interesting as a group of images, but rather as a series of words with specific relationships. Ferreira da Silva highlights the indifference of formal logic to the particular content of terms or propositions. Finally, he distinguishes between categorematic and syncategorematic words, explaining that this is a division of words, not of terms. As a term could never be syncategorematic, he also explores the concept of the universe of discourse, initially defined by Augustus de Morgan as the area of thought under examination, coinciding with the meaning of contrary terms. However, Ferreira da Silva criticizes reinterpretations that attribute different forms of existence to objects in different universes of discourse, deeming such ideas puerile. He argues that if we understand the universe of discourse as the area within which our language can operate, there is only one universe corresponding to lived experience.